way that you delineate Christianity in America, the four quadrants, which I found to be very helpful because people do tend to lump it in, as you said, to mainline Protestants, evangelicals, Black Protestants, charismatics, etc. But there's so much more wiggle room there. So tell us about the four quadrants as our jumping off point, and which quadrant you were focusing on in the book.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways of subdividing and categorizing American Christianity. I find most of them useful and helpful in different respects. But for the project of this book, I was really trying to focus in on a sector of American Christianity that is hard to delineate, hard to describe at times, and that sometimes flies under the radar. And so I offer a kind of way of thinking about American Christianity that's divided into four quadrants. And so if you think about it as kind of a standard grid, the two axes is the movement or expression or church that we're talking about denominational? That's one kind of axis. And the other one is are they charismatic? And just to fill that out a little bit, right? So denominations are the ways that most Protestants historically have found to organize ourselves. And you could kind of stretch and argue like the Roman Catholic Church kind of functions as a denomination. My Catholic friends don't like to be called a denomination. They're the Holy Mother Church, right? And so they don't want to be called that, but it's functionally a denomination, right? And then when we talk about charismatic in the Christian community, we're not using it in the generic sense that most people have probably heard of that word in terms of like, oh, this person has just a magnetic personality, or they're very watchable, right? They have riz, right? No, we're using it in the specific Christian sense, which is describing a Christian spirituality that's built around trying to access the supernatural dimensions of early Christianity. So Pentecostals are charismatic. But there's a whole range of other forms of charismatic belonging and belief. But these are the kind of Christians who speak in tongues, the kind of Christians who pray for miracles every day, the kind of Christians who participate in spiritual warfare, these sorts of practices that are associated with more supernatural dimensions of Christianity. Take those and kind of map them onto a grid. The first quadrant would be how most of us, I think of Christianity, right? Denominational and not charismatic. And there you would put most mainline Protestants. A lot of the historically Black church would fit in there, especially the stuff that kind of grew up before Pentecostalism. You'd put what I call kind of classical evangelicals, right? The Southern Baptists or the Presbyterian Church of America, the kind of older denominations. And then the second quadrant would be non-denominational, but not charismatic. And these folks are often the kind of breakaway churches that formed in the kind of era of fundamentalism where people are kind of prizing independence and autonomy, but they're not really influenced by charismatic teaching so much. The third quadrant is charismatic and denominational, and that's where you would put Pentecostalism. All right, so Pentecostalism is a denominational movement, at least in the United States it predominantly is. And so to say you're Pentecostal typically means you belong to a Pentecostal denomination. But you'd also put charismatic Catholics. And a lot of people don't really think about charismatic Catholics that much. It's a huge growing movement around the world where this charismatic spirituality, a Pentecostal style spirituality, is making real inroads in the Catholic Church, especially in South America and parts of Africa, but also in the U.S. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court Justice, grew up in a charismatic Catholic community. That's her background. And then the fourth quadrant is where you have this mix of non-denominational and charismatic. And that's really where I focus on in this book. That's the sector I'm trying to name and really kind of focus in on. And the other way to talk about that is it's the independent charismatic part of the church, where you have that mix of autonomy built through non-denominationalism, but then coming into contact with these more charismatic practices.